Smoke covered the land, thick and black. The battlefield was silent now. But the ground still burned in places. Broken weapons, fallen bodies, and shattered machines were everywhere. The war between humans and the Xerelians had destroyed everything here. Sergeant Ray Carter walked slowly through the wreckage, his rifle tight in his hands. He had been fighting for hours. Maybe days. He couldn't tell anymore. His squad was gone. His cums were dead. And only the sound of fire and crackling metal filled the air. Then he saw movement. At first, he thought it was another enemy. He raised his weapon fast, ready to fire. But when he got closer, he stopped. It was a Xerelian female kneeling in the mud, alone. Her armor was cracked, her arms. Behind her head, she had wounds across her chest and legs. But she was still alive. Her skin was blue and glowing faintly, like all of her kind. Her silver hair was dirty, stuck to her face with sweat and blood. Ray stepped closer, careful, slow. His eyes watching her every move. She didn't flinch. Didn't speak. She just stared at him with glowing yellow, eyes sharp but tired. And then she spoke. "Don't kill me, human." Her voice was calm but soft. "I'll warm your bed." Ray froze in place. His finger hovered over the trigger. He had heard many things on the battlefield, but never this. Was she mocking him? Playing some kind of trick. "What did you say?" he asked. "I said," the alien repeated, looking into his eyes, "if you spare me, I'll warm your bed." Ray's heart beat faster, not from attraction, but from confusion. This was a Xerelian. Warrior, maybe even an elite. Why would she say something like that? "Get on your stomach now," he ordered, his voice cold. "If you try anything, I'm not armed," she interrupted, still on her knees. "If I wanted to kill you, I would have done it before you saw me." She lowered her head, baring the back of her neck. It was a Xerelian sign of surrender and old tradition from their warrior culture. Ray had read about it in training, but never seen it happen for real. "You're not afraid to die?" He asked. "I am," she whispered, "but I'm more afraid of being forgotten." Ray looked around, still unsure. The silence was thick, and the air smelled like smoke and blood. He circled her slowly, his boots crushing pieces of her broken blade. She stayed still, didn't look up, didn't beg again. "What's your name?" He asked. "Kizari," she answered, "commander of the Xerelian 9th Legion." Ray's eyes widened slightly. She wasn't just a soldier, she was a top commander. She had probably led the attack that killed his friends, and now she was here, kneeling before him. "You're lucky I don't shoot you right now." He said. "I know," she replied, "but something changed inside me today." He didn't ask what. He didn't care. Or maybe he did, just a little. He looked at her again, really looked this time. There was no fear in her eyes, only something strange, something broken. "You're my prisoner now," he said, finally. Lowering his rifle, "Stand up. Move slowly." Kizari rose. Her body tall and strong, even injured. She limped slightly as she walked beside him, her bare feet pressing into the ashes. She didn't speak again, and neither did he, but both of them knew something strange had started between them. Not trust, not yet, but something as they disappeared into the smoke together. Ray looked back once at the place where she had kneeled. He would never forget that moment, the warrior kneeling in the firelight. And the offer that made him hesitate. He had no idea what would happen next, but he knew one thing: this wasn't the end of the war, it was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Ray led Kizari through the edge of the ruin zone. Avoiding the patrols and drone cameras, she followed without speaking, her silver hair blowing in the wind. Her steps heavy but steady. The human base was close, and Ray knew the questions would come the moment they saw her. He didn't have answers, not yet. Only a strange knot in his chest that refused to go away when they reached the outer walls of the human checkpoint. Guards shouted and raised their weapons. Ray lifted his hand quickly and shouted back, "She's disarmed. She surrendered to me." The soldiers looked stunned, unsure whether to shoot or call command. One of them, a thick-jawed sergeant, stepped forward and pointed at Kazari. "That's one of them," he growled. "She should be dead. She's mine." Ray replied firmly. "She gave up. She's my responsibility now." They let him pass. But the stairs followed him all the way into the holding bay. Inside the secure room, Ray sat Kazari down on a steel bench and locked the door from outside. A camera stared at her from the ceiling, and a guard monitored her from the hallway window. She just sat there, calm, hands on her lap, her yellow eyes scanning the walls slowly. Ray leaned against the wall outside, rubbing his face with his hands. What was he doing? He should have shot her, ended it clean, instead. He brought back a Zarelian commander who had probably ordered dozens of human deaths. And now she was sitting there like some quiet shadow from another world. An officer came to speak with Ray later, asking questions, writing reports. They took his armor, ran a check on his body cam, and even checked Kazari's pulse and biometrics. But nothing explained her behavior, not the surrender, not the offer, and not the silence. Ray was ordered to rest, but he couldn't sleep. That night, at midnight, he checked the monitor again. Kazari was still there. Eyes closed, breathing calm, like she wasn't a prisoner at all. He opened the door just enough to step inside, alert but curious. She opened her eyes as if she had sensed him the moment he arrived. "You're watching me," she said softly, not accusing, just a fact. "I should be," Ray replied. "You're not exactly harmless." "No," she said, "I'm not." He stayed by the door, arms crossed, eyes on her face. "I want to ask why," he said finally. "Why did you really surrender?" Kazari looked down at her hands, then slowly met his eyes again. "Because I was tired," she said, "of war, of killing, of orders that make no sense." "That's too easy," Ray said. "Zarelians don't get tired. They fight until they die." "I was prepared to die," she said. "Then I saw you, and I chose not to." There was something in her voice, not fear, not weakness. It sounded like choice, like she had finally made a decision for herself. She stood up slowly and walked toward him until the chain on her wrist stopped her. Her voice dropped even lower. "My people won't accept this," she whispered. "If they find me alive, they will kill me." Ray's eyes narrowed. "Then why come here? Why not run?" "Because I was trained to be a weapon," she said. "But I want to be more." Ray didn't speak for a moment. Then he asked the question that had haunted him since the battlefield. "Did you mean what you said?" Kazari tilted her head slightly. "About warming your bed?" He nodded slowly. "I said it because I knew it would make you pause," she admitted. "But I wasn't lying." Ray's breath caught in his throat, but he didn't move. "I don't want to be used," he said, "and I don't want to use anyone." A small, sad smile touched her lips. "Then don't," she said. "Just let me stay, even if only as a prisoner." Ray stared at her for a long time. Then he turned and left the room, locking the door again behind him. He didn't know what he felt, not yet, but it was dangerous, because deep down, he didn't want her to leave either. 3 days passed, and Kazari remained locked in the holding cell. She didn't speak to the guards, didn't complain, didn't ask for anything. She sat quietly, ate whatever they gave her, and sometimes closed her eyes for hours. But every time Ray checked the security feed, she was awake, waiting. The base was buzzing with rumors. Some soldiers said Ray had gone soft. Others believed the alien girl had mind powers. But Ray didn't care what they thought. He couldn't stop thinking about her eyes, her calm voice, the way she surrendered. Without fear, on the 4th night, the power flickered. A storm had damaged one of the generators, and the backup system kicked in late. For a few minutes, the lights went out in most parts of the base. Ray was in his quarters when his door creaked open slowly. He reached for his sidearm fast, but stopped when he saw who it was. Sari stood there in the dim hallway light, soaked from the rain. Her wrists were still bruised from the restraints. But the guards must have left her cell unlocked by mistake. She didn't run, didn't hide, didn't attack. Instead, she stepped inside slowly and closed the door behind her. "I didn't come to hurt you," she said softly. "I had the chance to run, but I came here instead." Ray stared at her, breathing hard, unsure if he should call for help or listen. "What do you want from me?" he asked, not moving. She walked closer and stopped in front of him. "To survive," she said, "but not just survive, want something more." She touched her chest where the cracked armor still hung loose. "My kind believes in strength, control, power," she whispered.
"But
"I've learned something else." From you, Ray's voice was hard, but his hands trembled slightly. "You tried to kill humans, now you're here saying this." "I was made for war," she said, "but I'm tired of being a tool." She stepped even closer now. "The air?" Between them growing heavy, "You still didn't answer my question," Ray said, eyes locked on hers. "Why did you really say those words back then, on the battlefield?" Kizari looked at him for a long moment. Then she slowly pulled the top part of her armor loose. "Not to tempt, but to show trust in my culture," she began. "Offering warmth to an enemy is not weakness. It's surrender of the spirit." Ray blinked. Caught off guard by the honesty in her voice, "It was never about seduction," she continued. "It was about giving up everything I had left, even pride." Silence filled the room, heavy and strange. Ray sat on the edge of his bunk, rubbing his eyes. "You confuse the hell out of me," he muttered. "One minute, you're a killer. The next, you're this." "I'm both," she said, stepping forward again. "But I won't lie to you." She sat down on the cold floor, her back against the wall, hands in her lap. "I didn't come to your room for pleasure, human," she said. "I came because I don't feel like a prisoner when I'm near you." Ray looked at her in silence, his mind full of doubt, questions, and something else, something warmer. This wasn't just survival, not anymore. "You know they'll throw you back in the cell when they find out." He said, "I'll go if you ask me to." She replied, "But if I stay, even just for tonight, I'll sleep for the first time in days." Ray didn't speak, but he reached into the closet and pulled out a blanket. He tossed it to her, and she caught it with a quiet nod. He didn't ask her to climb into the bed. And she didn't try. Instead, she curled up on the floor near the door. Pulling the blanket over her, minutes passed. The storm outside roared, thunder echoing across the hills, but inside the room, it was strangely calm. Ray watched her close. Her eyes and breathed slowly. She didn't move again, didn't speak, and for the first time since the war began. Ray felt something shift deep inside him. He still didn't know if he could trust her. But he knew one thing. She had wanted to escape. She would have never come here. She had chosen to stay, and maybe, so had he. The sun rose slowly behind the clouds, painting the sky in dull gray. Ray sat on the edge of his bed, watching the sleeping alien on the floor. She hadn't moved all night, just curled up under the blanket like a child. Her silver hair lay across her cheek, and for the first time, she looked peaceful when the morning alarm buzzed. She opened her eyes and looked at him. She didn't panic or act guilty. She just gave a small nod. "I'll go back to the cell," she said quietly, before the guards noticed. Ray shook his head slowly. "No," he replied. "If they ask, I'll say I brought you here for questioning." She blinked in surprise, but said nothing more. Ray handed her a spare shirt. One of his old ones. She slipped it over her armor, covering the cracks and bloodstains. They walked out together, and this time the guards didn't stare with the same anger. Some whispered, others gave sharp looks, but no one stopped them. Back in the command center, Ray was called into a private meeting. Kizari was left alone in a waiting room still under watch. but no longer locked away inside the meeting room. Colonel Briggs stood behind a large screen. Arms crossed. "You're making waves, Sergeant," he said, bringing an alien commander back alive. "Keeping her at your quarters." Ray stood firm, hands behind his back. She surrendered. "Sir, I followed protocol." Briggs leaned closer, eyes narrow. "She's dangerous, even without a weapon," he said. "And now her people want her dead." Ray's head tilted. "Her own people?" The colonel nodded and tapped the screen. A live transmission played it, showed a Zarelian war council speaking in their strange language. But the translation text was clear. "She betrayed her code," one voice said. "Her death will restore. Our honor, a bounty, was placed, high and public. Any Zarelian who killed her would be celebrated as a hero." Ray's stomach tightened. This wasn't just about war anymore. It was personal. She had given up everything, and now, her own race. "Wanted her erased? What are my orders, sir?" Ray asked. "Transfer her off-world," Briggs said. "Somewhere remote." "Somewhere safe." Ray paused, eyes still on the screen. "She'll never make it out alive," he whispered. "They'll come for her before she boards the shuttle." "That's not your concern," the colonel replied. "Let command handle it." But Ray knew what that meant. Command would stall, delay, maybe even leave her exposed on purpose. To keep peace, to avoid questions, to clean up quietly, he clenched. His fist's butt stayed quiet, nodding stiffly before leaving the room. Back in the hallway, Kizari was sitting alone. Hands folded in her lap, she looked up as he approached, sensing something had changed. "They're coming for you," Ray said under his breath. "Your own kind." She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. "I knew they would," she whispered. "When I surrendered, I made my choice." Ray leaned in closer, his voice sharp and low. "If we don't move tonight, they'll find you." "Then let's move tonight," she replied. Without hesitation, that night, Ray stole clearance, codes from the system, and rerouted patrols. He gathered supplies, a medkit, and a cloaking hood for Kizari. She said nothing the entire time, just followed him, silent and sure. Every step they took was dangerous, but they moved like shadows. Halfway to the outer gates, the alarm suddenly blared. Red lights flashed across the sky. "They found us," Ray muttered, pulling his weapon. Kizari turned sharply, her eyes narrowing. Figures emerged from the trees. Zarelians, masked, silent, fast. Ray fired first, his shots striking the lead assassin in the chest. Kizar moved like lightning, grabbing a dropped blade and slicing clean through a second attacker. But more were coming. "We can't fight them all," Ray shouted. Pulling her back, she nodded and ran beside him, blood splashing across her borrowed clothes. The forest swallowed them as they vanished into the night. Behind them, the base burned and sirens screamed into the sky. Ray didn't stop running until his legs gave out. He dropped to the ground, chest heaving. Kizari knelt beside him, one hand on his shoulder. Her voice was quiet, but full of fire. "You risked your life for me," she said. "Why?" Ray looked at her, barely able to breathe. "Because I believe you," he said. "And I'm not going to let them take you." And in that moment, neither of them were soldier or prisoner anymore. They were something new to survivors, to fugitives, to broken people, now running together. The cold wind cut through the trees as Ray and Kizari moved deeper into the forest. Neither of them spoke, their breath forming clouds in the night air. They were wounded, exhausted, and hunted, but still alive. Ray's leg was bleeding, and Kizari's side was soaked with purple blood. Still, they kept walking, step after step, trusting only the silence between them. By morning, they found a small cave in the rocks, hidden behind vines. Ray collapsed inside. Dragging his gear bag behind him, Kizari followed, her legs shaking. Then dropped to her knees beside him. "We need to rest," she said softly. "You're losing blood." Ray didn't argue. He just leaned back and let her tear open his pant leg. Her hands were careful, but her eyes stayed cold, focused. She used his medkit, applying pressure and sealing the wound with a hiss of foam. Ray groaned, but didn't move. "You've done this before," he said through his teeth. "Too many times." She replied, "For people who wouldn't do the same for me." When she was done, she sat back and looked at her own side. Ray noticed the deep cut along her ribs and cursed under his breath. "You should have told me," he said. Reaching for the kit, she didn't stop him. Didn't flinch as he cleaned her wound. "You're better at this than I thought," she muttered with a faint smirk. "I wasn't always a soldier, Ray." Said, "I used to work as a field medic before the war." Sari looked at him for a long moment, her voice quiet. "Then why did you become a killer?" He didn't answer at first, his hands still working carefully. "Because the killing came to my home first," he finally said, "and I wasn't fast enough to stop it." The silence after that was heavy. Kizari touched his hand gently. "Just for a second, I know that pain," she whispered. "We're more alike than you think." Later, they sat by a small fire at the back of the cave. Ray had set up a heat core, and the warmth began to fill the space. Kizari pulled off the rest of her broken armor and wrapped herself in the blanket he gave her. Her body was lean and scarred, but strong. She didn't seem ashamed. Not even when he looked too long. Instead, she said softly, "You can ask, if you're curious." Ray blinked, caught off guard. "Ask what?" "Anything," she said. "You've earned that much." He stared at the fire for a moment before speaking. "Why did you really stay with me that night?" Kizari tilted her head slightly, her glowing eyes locked on his. "Because you didn't see me as a tool," she said. "You saw me as something more." Ray's throat tightened. He hadn't known it then, but she was right. Something in her had called to the part of him that still believed in people, even broken ones. Outside, the wind howled and branches snapped. Kizari moved closer to the fire and shivered slightly. Ray noticed and moved beside her, pulling the blanket over both of them. She didn't pull away, not this time, you know? "They'll keep hunting us," she whispered. "I know," he replied, "but I won't let them take you." She looked up at him, her face inches from his. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. "Not when I'm with you." Their foreheads touched for a moment. No kiss, no promise, just warmth, outside. Death waited in the trees, but in that small cave, they had found something else. Not just safety, not just survival. They had found trust, something rare, something real, and for the first time since the war began, Ray felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone anymore. The days passed slowly as they hid deeper in the wildlands every morning. Ray checked the scanners for movement, and every night, Kizari sharpened a broken blade she had salvaged from the last fight. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them no longer felt cold. It felt like understanding Ray's leg was healing, but he still limped. Kizari moved quietly. Always alert, always watching the trees. She had lived her life in war, trained to see threats before they came. But now, she wasn't looking for enemy. She was looking out for him, one night. After gathering water from a nearby stream, Ray returned to the cave. He stepped inside and saw her staring at the fire, her arms crossed tightly around her body. Without a word, he took off his jacket and placed it over her shoulders. She looked up at him, her voice low. "You shouldn't care for me like this," she said. "It's not your duty." Ray sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Maybe it's not about duty anymore," he answered. "Maybe I just want you to live." She turned to him, her face serious but soft. "I was raised to believe that feelings are weakness," she said, "that love is just a distraction." Ray smiled faintly, his eyes on the fire. "And what? Do you believe now?" He asked. Kizari hesitated, then looked down at her hands. "I believe that not feeling is worse," she whispered. "It makes you hollow." She leaned her head gently on his shoulder. And for once, she allowed herself to rest. The next morning, Ray awoke to the sound of strange buzzing. He sat up quickly and saw the faint shimmer of a drone passing through the trees. Kizari was already awake, crouched behind a rock with her blade ready. "They've found us," she said. Calmly, they're scanning the forest. Ray grabbed his gear and motioned to her. "We move now," he said. "We head toward the eastern cliff. There's a drop, but it leads to the old mining tunnels." Kizari nodded, and they ran together, keeping low. Every step careful and silent. The drone didn't follow, but more were coming. He could feel it as they climbed down the steep rocks. Ray slipped. He hit the side hard and nearly tumbled over the edge. Kizari caught his hand at the last second, her arm shaking as she held him. "Don't you dare fall," she growled, her voice trembling. With a final pull, she dragged him up, and they both collapsed on the ledge. Ray breathed hard, blood running from his arm. Kizari leaned over him, panic flashing in her eyes for the first time. "Are you hurt?" she asked, touching his chest, his face, his side. "I'm okay," he muttered. "Just a few bruises." She pressed her forehead to his, her voice shaking. "You could have died, but I didn't," he whispered back. "Because you were there." She stared at him, eyes glowing faintly. Her voice became softer, deeper. "Ray," she said, "if we don't make it, I want you to know something." He nodded slowly, waiting. "I'm not afraid to die," she said, "but I am afraid that I won't have more time with you." Ray reached up and cupped her face gently. "You will," he said, "because I'm not letting you go." They didn't kiss, not yet. But the closeness between them said enough. There, on that cold stone ledge, two enemies had become something else. Not lovers. Not quite, but something even more dangerous. They were loyal to each other now, beyond orders, beyond war, behind them. The sound of engines grew louder. They had to move again soon, but not just to run. They had a plan now, and something to fight for. Not survival. Not victory, but each other. And that kind of bond was stronger than any weapon either of them had ever held. The tunnels beneath the cliffs were dark, cold, and endless. Ray and Kizari moved slowly, guided only by a flickering wrist light and the sound of dripping water. The walls were narrow in some places, wide in others, but they never stopped. The sound of enemy drones echoed above, but they were safe for now. They stopped to rest near an old supply chamber left from a mining operation decades ago. There were broken crates, rusted tools, and a generator that still sparked with faint life. Ray managed to start it, giving them a few hours of warmth and light. Kizari lay on the ground, her head resting on his chest, her breathing calm. "We've been running long enough," Ray said softly. Kizari nodded, not lifting her head. "We can't run forever," she whispered. "Eventually, they'll corner us, then we stop running," Ray said. "And we fight back on our terms." Kizari looked up at him, a small fire in her golden eyes. "We don't have weapons or allies," she said. "Just us." Ray smiled. "That's all we need." He reached into his bag and pulled out the small data chip they had stolen from the Zeralian outpost days earlier. "This," he said, "is proof of what?" she asked, sitting up slowly. "That your commanders were planning to destroy both sides." He answered, "They didn't want peace. They wanted extinction, ours and yours." Kizar's jaw tightened, her voice sharp with anger. "They were willing to sacrifice their own people," she growled. Ray nodded. "That's why they want you dead, not because you surrendered, but because you know the truth." She stared at the chip for a long time, then took it in her hand. "We expose this," she said, "and the war ends, or we die trying." Ray added. Kizari smirked. Then let's make sure we don't die by morning. They emerged from the tunnel into a ruined communications outpost. Ray connected the chip to the last working tower, fingers shaking as he input the transmission code. "It's going out," he said, "to both human and Zarelian networks. Once it spreads, they can't bury it." Kizari whispered as the data uploaded. Engines roared above. Zarelian assault craft hovered over the ridge, weapons locking onto the tower. Ray pulled Kizari behind cover, shouting, "We need more time, just a few more seconds." Blaster fire lit the ground around them, shaking the earth. Kizari jumped forward and grabbed one of the old turrets, charging it manually. She fired burst after burst into the sky. Holding the enemy back with pure force, Ray watched her, his chest tight knot with fear. But pride, the signal reached full upload, blinking green. "It's done," he yelled. "They have the truth now." Kisar dove beside him as a turret exploded behind her. Her shoulder was bleeding, but she smiled anyway. "That felt good," she said, breathing hard. "Remind me never to argue with you." Ray replied with a grin. Suddenly, the enemy ships began to pull back. One by one, they turned and flew away. No more shots, no more threats. The truth had spread across the networks, and the war had changed in a single moment. No one could ignore it, now not human generals, not alien. Warlords Ray and Kizari lay on the ground. Surrounded by smoke, but alive, they looked at each other. Tired, but full of something stronger than fear. Hope. Later, back at a neutral camp, she stood beside him while both humans and Zarelians watched from a distance. They didn't know what to make of the bond between a soldier and a former enemy. But they didn't speak against it either. Kizari touched Ray's hand gently, her voice calm. "They might never understand." She said, "I don't need them to." Ray replied, "I only need you that night." When the tents were quiet and the fires burned low, she stepped into his shelter. She didn't say a word, just looked into his eyes and whispered one thing. "Not because I owe you, not because I'm afraid," she said, "but because I choose you." He nodded, and they shared the quiet space, not as prisoner and captor, not as enemies, but as to souls who had survived hell and found something worth living for, in a galaxy full of sea. In a galaxy full of war and betrayal. Their story was rare, and it had just begun.